Well, I taught for 32 years, mostly, well, all of it in Sonoma County, California, as a high school teacher and special ed. I was a special ed resource specialist teacher for my whole career. And for me, the issues of the starving of the public school system started to become apparent to me from the very beginning of my career. Things like that I noticed that were different, because I went to high school in California, and by the time I started teaching, there was no hot water for showers in the PE department, okay? And, it's kind of like that there's kind of an adage or something about, you put a frog in a kettle and you just put a little flame underneath the kettle, and it kind of doesn't notice that the water's getting hotter and hotter and hotter, that this situation, it's insidious, and it happens, slowly, and people kind of go, well, I don't like that, but it's kind of, oh, well. Also because teachers have a huge, it's an enormous job. As you know, you're a teacher, and many of you are teachers. And so I think sometimes, just in the interest of survival, some of this stuff, went kind of, we just accepted it without much of a fight. I saw things like I can't remember the name of it now, so long ago. It's the Career Center. I saw the Career Center go away at our school, and then it went away at all the other high schools. A Career Center for a high school, really? We don't have a Career Center where students can go and explore careers and find out how to hook up and how they can get connected to higher education, and no Career Center. And in the last few years of my career, and our budgets just kept getting smaller and shrinking and smaller and smaller. I saw my colleagues who taught chemistry have to ask teachers ask the parents at back to school night for funding, so that parents had to pony up, whatever they could, so that the chemistry teacher could have chemicals and supplies for her lab. So the one that really, when this one happened, about 5 or 6 years ago, at my high school in Santa Rosa, the librarian was axed. We had a librarian part-time for about 3 or 4 years. We had a librarian 2 or 3 days a week and shared with another site. And then our teacher librarian went away completely, and the library was run by a paraprofessional staff person who are very, very valuable, but in my opinion are not really credentialed. They're not credentialed, and they're not really qualified to do the things that a teacher librarian does. So my point is that this is my experience, was a direct experience of starving an institution. And in my opinion, what's happened is you starve an institution over a period of time, and then you point your finger at the institution and say, look, it's failing. Look what a bad job these people are doing. And it seems to me that what the media has been able to do over the last 30 years, well, teachers have been blamed for all kinds of things. I even heard a narrative in the 80s of teachers being blamed for the failure of Detroit. That the fact that the car industry fell apart in Detroit was connected to I have heard really far-fetched things that when they're on, the nightly news on television, people just kind of absorb those messages unconsciously, so that we have a nation of people who think that education is failing. So I started to read, and a very, very important person to me as I began to awaken from this I want to talk about testing for a second. The testing regime came in during the last 11 years of my career. No Child Left Behind. And at the very beginning of it, I couldn't really see the whole picture. And I remember that my colleagues and I were actually thrilled that there was money for textbooks. Suddenly, this money got ponied up, and we got these incredible sets of literature books with all these ancillary materials to teach second language learners, and it was fabulous. It was wonderful. But as the testing, and we also collaborated a lot, and I was already collaborating because that's who I am, and working with English teachers to work with learning disability kids. So I was teaching my expertise and learning a whole lot from them in the 90s. But as the testing regimen continued and schools got pressured more and more and more to meet these goals, annual growth goals in every single demographic in the school, I started to see horrible educational practices. I had learning disability students, and I had a lot of second language learner students as well. So kids who had lots of struggles with their learning. And can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. One of the things that, because the principals were under the gun to, make these annual goals, was scheduling kids for 2 periods of math and 2 periods of English. And for a high school kid, a teenager in high school, this is a killer. A kid who already, you're putting them in things that they are a struggle for them to begin with. They have almost nothing in their day because PE is mandated, and what do you have left? And you're having trouble fitting in things like social studies and science. So not educationally sound, and I started to see these kinds of things, and our whole focus was on making the annual testing goal. So I feel like I experienced firsthand the counterproductive nature of No Child Left Behind high stakes testing at my school. I began to read Diane Ravitch, who I highly, highly recommend. If there's anybody here, I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir here. But Diane Ravitch, I think, has written the Bible on what's happening with this. Her analysis, because I think she's a very, very well-educated and wise educator and understands the function of public education and the wisdom of having a strong, common public education system for all children that is funded fully. She understands all that, and so she has gone, her books, especially Reign of Error, I would highly recommend. So my colleagues and I began to have little, we started talking about this at my school, and when I retired, I became a little bit of an activist in my county doing discussion groups. I have felt in many ways like I'm kind of this lone wolf, but pulling together teacher groups and trying to pull in parents and people into discussion groups of Diane Ravitch's work. That's how it kind of got started. And then I've become connected with the Network for Public Education, which I also highly recommend. If you're not on their website, go to their website and get hooked in, get their emails and such, because you get a lot of information nationally about what's going on. And I've gone to their annual conference, and I'm going to the end. I've gone once. I'm going again in this April to the conference in North Carolina, and Reverend Barber is the keynote speaker. So I think the network is pulling together people from all over this country who are working on this issue in little dinky school districts where there's where the unions are being busted up in these right-to-work states. You get tuned in to the struggle that is going on under a lot of different conditions. I think what the other things that I've done are, done book events with Anthony Cody, who has a website, who has Living in Dialogue, and his book on the Gates Foundation, his expose on the Gates Foundation, The Educator and the Oligarch. We've done a couple of book events for him, and then we did a big screening that was a pretty successful event we had 50 people in a theater in Santa Rosa, and we showed Education, Inc., very good film, if you haven't heard about it, about a school district, two school districts side by side in Colorado, who were basically taken over by ALEC operatives who came into their school district and basically owned the district. And it's a documentary of the parents and the community fighting back. They had a big agenda with making religious school a charter school and basically getting public money for a religious school. But it's really well done. It's really well done because it is very instructive about ALEC. I would highly recommend that. I just became aware of the coalition that has written and is promoting this petition drive, and I feel very, very strongly that charter schools, as far as coming back to charter schools, all of the testing, all of this bad education, there's a ton more that I haven't told you. This whole situation is a morass of various forces, billionaire forces. Tech titans are huge, and they have so much money, and they have so much clout, so much ability to just grab people by the throat and say, you're not educating people in the way that they're supposed to be, you're not bringing people into the 21st century with all the computer technology and stuff, and we have the answers to that. And they don't. And I have huge questions. I'm very, very concerned about the amount of screen time for young people. In my school district where I live in Petaluma, and many districts now are doing huge computer purchases because the Common Core tests, it's required that they be taken on computers. And I understand computers are here, and we need to have and computers are wonderful, and I know hundreds of teachers personally who are doing fabulous things with computers. But kids do not and should not, I think, be put on computers at the age of 5, 6, 7. And they need to be, kids need socialization, they need to sing, they need to look in everybody's eyes, they need to look into a human being's eyes, their teacher, when they're being educated. And so, anyway, that's a little bit about me, and I'm very committed to getting signatures to begin, in Sonoma County, and I'm not very well organized, but I do have some connections with retired teachers at CTA, and I'm trying to get more connected in with organizations and groups that have some clout and some power, and just kind of see how we can work together.